Hello, my name is Brendan, and I'm the associate programmer here at Renew Theaters. First off, I'd like to thank all of our members and movie-going patrons at the Ambler, County, Highway, and Princeton Garden Theaters for their support during this current closure. Your support has allowed us to keep the lights on while still showcasing artistically important films in our virtual theater. One such important film is Ruth, Justice Ginsburg in her own words. If you haven't done so, please watch this powerful, intimate portrait of Justice Ginsburg's life, as it's currently available to stream in our virtual theater. Right now, I'm thrilled to introduce the director of Ruth, Academy Award-winning filmmaker and five-time Oscar nominee, Freida Lee Mock, whose tremendous filmography includes such films as Maya Lin, A Strong Clear Vision, Return with Honor, and Anita, Speaking Truth to Power. Thank you for joining me today, Freida.
Thank you, Brendan. I'm delighted to be a part of the Renew Theaters virtual cinema landscape. And thank you, patrons of Renew and Pennsylvania and New Jersey folks who support this great theaters chain.
Yeah, and we're really excited to be showing your latest documentary, Ruth. And watched it yesterday. A tremendous film, and really loved it. And I have a few questions about the making of the film. So I'm just going to jump right into it with probably the most simplest question to ask. How did you get involved making this documentary on Justice Ginsburg's life?
I was lucky in that two wonderful executive producers, Regina Scully and Geraldine Dreyfus, who are credited in the film, came to me and asked if I would like to do a film on Justice Ginsburg. I jumped at the chance, partly because I didn't know much about her beyond her being a distinguished justice and a person who has such tremendous regard by the judicial community. Yes. So it started actually. They asked me actually in 2015 if I'd be interested in doing this film, and so I wrote Justice Ginsburg, with whom I'd actually had a previous interesting brief correspondence. She had heard I had done the Anita Hill film called Anita and hadn't seen it. And so a mutual friend asked if I would send her a copy. I sent her that copy, including the Maya Lin film and a couple other films. And she wrote me back. She wrote me a note. I was a little surprised, thinking that she's much too busy to spend time writing a really lovely, just from the heart kind of note. And that was it. And then when I was asked to do this film, I wrote her again and asked if she would if she would participate. She said that a film on, a fiction film was being made on her life, or that is a part of her work and life, called In the Matter of Sex, that her nephew was writing. And so she said, let's talk about this idea after 2016 when the film comes out. The film didn't come out in 2016. The election turned out to be one that surprised some people. And so our team decided it's time to start to get this film out about Justice Ginsburg. So we started the film in 2017 with the support of basically these two wonderful executive producers, and other two came in. We were so that's how the film started. And pretty much we finished it in late 2019, or basically before she passed away, by 2020. And so what the film you see is what we had intended as she was with us. And so it's very much in the present tense, as you can see. But even though she has passed, it's a timeless in terms of the ideas and how she spoke about her ideas.
Yeah, and it's a very powerful film, especially being the most recent Justice Ginsburg film, I believe, to come out after her passing, and it definitely looks back at her life in a very strong manner. And you mentioned there that you started production in 2017, and a lot of things were going on for the last 4 years up until you finished production. And one of those things was the Trump presidency and the Kavanaugh hearings, for instance. Did it bear any influence on the film during the production process?
Not to the extent that it bared on the core aspects of her life and her thinking in terms of law. And it didn't even enter our mind to include, as an example, the Kavanaugh hearings. We were just finishing at that time, and I felt that without saying it, you could look at that hearing and think of the theme as the film opened, with the idea of how does a person with 3 strikes against her rise to the Supreme Court? She's a woman, a Jew, and a mother. And so, and therefore we're talking about a lot of barriers. How do you get there? Whereas you have, without saying anything, you have the recent history of the Kavanaugh hearings to actually see how another path will get you to the Supreme Court. So I didn't think we needed to bring in current events, really. And her involvement with the Trump administration was simply one of the many justices, the 9 justices who was ruling. And except for one off-the-cuff comment as a justice during the campaign when she called him a faker, then there wasn't much conversation on her part about the specifics of the Trump administration. So that we didn't think to include that into the film because it's really meant to be a timeless story and touching upon the core ideas that really defined who she is and her work.
And speaking of it being a timeless story, it's so incredibly rich with details. The research that probably went into it, like how did you gather it all, and where did you start?
Thank you for asking that question because one doesn't know you're entering into this abyss. Initially, I generally started a project by just reading, just to make sure I understand the story and the themes and the subject. So I'll just start reading primary sources and secondary sources and just get a handle on the story, and then kind of getting an idea of what I and the team will do with an hour and a half, 2-hour movie. You can't tell everything, and therefore, what do you want to really emphasize? So with that in mind, then the question is, since she's lived this great long life, is there footage that shows her when she's in her 40s, in her 50s, in the 60s? And so we asked these wonderful archivists to do a huge search. And so we found hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of stock footage. So we started with that to help define what we will shoot and what we don't need to film. Because I feel that if you see her speaking candidly and maybe less filtered, not such a high profile person as she has been as a justice of the US Supreme Court, maybe there's a little more candor in the approach. And we found that very true in the early footage. You see her when she's talking to children. It's such a beautiful scene with 5th graders, and she talks to 5th graders the way she'll talk to an adult, I feel, in terms of those ideas. So yeah, thank you for asking that question. There's an enormous amount of material to look at, and that helped define who we wanted to talk to in terms of actual filming. So as an example, I knew that we wanted to have the story of the clerk's relationship to Justice Ginsburg. And in looking at all the hundreds of hours of footage, I think the last hour out popped this wonderful relationship between Justice Goodwin Liu, who you see in the film, talking with the justice, on this forum. And there was such a nice energy between them. I said, that's the justice I think we should have in the film. And then it also allowed us to kind of cast, a multicultural kind of look. We have everybody, and, we have, I feel the film is quite multicultural because you have, white, Black, Asian, brown, young and old. It's kind of a nice mix that just happened that way. But yes, the stock footage actually shaped very much how much more we needed to film in terms of the live action. Yeah. So it was a delight discovery, when you find such a certain kind of gold. Because the big challenge for me in telling the story was how was I going to tell and discuss the important constitutional cases that she argued before the Supreme Court, because those were kind of seminal to her reputation as a litigator who did defining work in the area of gender law and women's rights. And how would you do that so it's dynamic, not a laundry list, And of course, that wonderful scene of the 5th grade students in Indianapolis visiting who were so smart. I felt that the teachers, the public school teachers, prepared them for that visit. I think it was almost a 2-hour visit. It was it was incredible that I said, this is how, because they asked her about these constitutional questions, and that allowed me, the filmmaker, to go off and kind of dramatize both in illustration and animation what those cases are about. And I must say that was the big challenge as a filmmaker. How do you make those, complex constitutional questions dealing with, pay equity or men's rights to be treated equally as a woman by the Social Security Administration, that wonderful plaintiff, Stephen Weisenfeld, whose wife died at childbirth and he was left with this beautiful baby, and he wanted to stay home to take care of the child. And when he applied for benefits, he found there were none for widows. Yeah. So anyway, that fifth grade class allowed.
That was a tremendous. It was just tremendous to watch, and it was definitely like.
Thank you.
Real treat just to like be able to see something like never seen that before, and it was a real treat to see that in the documentary. And piggybacking off of the question, something that you did bring up was the animation and illustrations in the film. What went into including those illustrations, and what was that process like?
Thank you for asking that question, because I feel that saved me, so to speak, to make those complex questions understandable. And so I said, how do I reach the censors? My target, besides the general population, I said, I want kids in junior high and high school and early college. If we can reach them, I think, because it's a story, it's potentially, can reach a broad population, especially since the fifth grade students were in there asking these, questions about law, about constitutional questions. So I said, I think animation, graphic novel, that idea came into mind, or just cartoons, but not cartoons, So that was the idea. And then I started looking for, the great animator. And it turns out Jason Carpenter, who got a master's from CalArts Art School, is really an artist as well as an animation is one of his many talents. If you saw the film, Call Me Malala, the film on Malala.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, he did. You remember the animation of that?
Yeah, true. Yeah, and it really evoked that. So I was curious, like the same end. Wow.
That's how it happened. I called up the director, Davis Guggenheim. Where is he? Can I talk? Will you introduce me? So that's what happened. You cast. It's all about casting even nonfiction characters, so to speak, in the film. So it was immediely the right person. And so you meet, and you, how do you? Yes, you give him this. We talked through the scene. I remember we threw out one of the cases. So I says, we don't have to do all the cases. There's 6 that she argued. You get the idea. You get the most important, especially the cases in which men were the plaintiffs. Those are very strategically selected, so to speak. I mean, that is to say, there are many hundreds of cases that came to the ACLU, and Ruth Ginsburg, then not being an advocate litigator, was strategically in charge of deciding how selecting the cases, which ones would go to the Supreme Court. And she delighted, I believe, in having plaintiffs who are men, to make that point that these laws were hindering not only women, but hindering men. Mm-hmm. So what was the point? Yeah. Anyway, in working with Jason, we did feel we didn't have to do it wasn't, if you as the audience knows that there were 6 cases, if you want to know about all 6, you can go off, and maybe hopefully read more. But otherwise, we felt. sometimes, yeah, and looking at how do you, we did run into one case which was so hard to explain. We said, let's maybe not, maybe not, we don't need to explain all 6.
Mhm.
We explained the most important, the most vivid, and the ones that actually came across, like the drunk, the thirsty boys, the
Yes,
thirsty
yeah,
boy case. I mean, that was fun because
yeah.
in one sense they thought it was such a silly case, but it was a constitutional case about
Mhm.
in Oklahoma, girls at 18 could drink, 8 ounces? Anyway, they could drink starting at age 18, and the boys had to wait till 21. That didn't seem quite right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah. So anyway, working with Jason was
Mhm.
just wonderful.
Yeah, it's so tremendous. It's one of those things that even when you watch the trailer, it's like for a documentary, you're getting all this tremendous archival footage and interviews, but even seeing those animations is just so eclectic and such a tremendous mix for a documentary, especially about Justice Ginsburg's life. And everything just fits so well together. And also, still talking about your research into the film, I was curious, were there any bits of information or facts about Justice Ginsburg that either surprised you or stood out to you while you were doing your research?
Thank you for your question.
Yeah.
What really stood out to me was that I found that as a national leader, she was the only one who would bring up 2 very important issues. One was the internment of the Japanese Americans during World War II, which she felt was such a violation of constitutional rights. We're talking about 100,000 plus American citizens of Japanese descent. They're Americans, but on the stroke of a pen, because we all can understand, we've seen so many executive orders that what
Yes.
we've done these last
Mhm.
4 years, if not more right now, that it could be as fast as that. And with, in 24 hours, these people, American citizens of Japanese descent, were just ordered into, trains or in, staging areas and sequestered away for 4 years, at a great personal and financial loss to them. Yeah.
Mhm.
So that she talked about that. And the other issue that she would bring up is unconscious bias. She was asked by Justice Liu in that conversation, what remains of the work you did in the 70s? Because her work in gender law was seminal in her, in this, the 70s work was seminal in terms of her legal work. And she said now into the 20,000, that this was 45 years later, we're talking, it's 50 years later, she was talking with him. And she said, unconscious bias remains the next frontier. And when you think of that she was saying in answer to him, that unconscious bias is a relation to sex. But we know that idea, implicit bias or unconscious bias relates to, especially after the George Floyd situation, we're talking about racial unconscious bias,
Mhm.
LGBT unconscious bias. I mean, elder ages. I mean, unconscious bias. We mean well, but we come to this world with the ideas and community standards that shape us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that I find was really really illuminating about how she was very conscious of the platform she had and the prominence she had and the responsibility that comes with that kind of um, prominence.
Mhm.
And words do matter, and
Yeah.
they have an impact. Yeah. So that was wonderful. There are things that I just couldn't fit into this story to make it all flow and all that. And one thing which you can read about, and I think it's really interesting to note, is that before she started teaching at Rutgers and Columbia, she took time off to do a book on Swedish civil procedure. So she wrote in her early 30s, after she finished that 2-year time working for the judge Palmieri, she took on a research project at Columbia in order to write this book. So she learned Swedish. in
Wow.
order to do her research. Of course, you learn. Why not? You learn Swedish or Swahili. Yeah. So she learned Swedish, and she co-wrote this significant book called Swedish Civil Procedure, and it's used. And so what's interesting, she was in Sweden over a number of months, several visits, and she actually, it was very formative in terms of her cognizance about gender equality, because she found a society and a community much farther ahead than the United States in the early 60s. She saw women working outside of the home. I think women made up 25% of the law school's class. She saw a woman judge who was 8 months pregnant, working. So it just sort of shaped, a model of what could be.
Yeah. And also talk about the film, I really felt like a lot of the people that you interviewed were just tremendous interviews. How did you go about choosing the interviewees to be included in this film?
It's a great question. I'll tell you, actually, I found them first.
Okay.
Except, I think all of them I happened to find as I was doing the visual research and the stock footage. I said, I knew I wanted a clerk, and there was Justice Goodwin Liu. Then I saw this panel, which is in the film. There's a panel of Justice Ginsburg talking to Columbia students with several women, one of who was with her in the 70s, working with the ACLU, Kathleen Paradas, who's throughout the film and who you see testifying on her behalf at the hearing, and knows just is clearly a friend with her from the 70s. Mm-hmm. So she spoke well about her both professionally and personally when Marty passed away, and she talked about how anyway she popped out of the film in that panel, which I thought was fascinating because it dealt with her Judge Ginsburg. No, by that time she was just appointed justice. She was talking about the Weisenfeld case. Mm-hmm. There were the two women, and I noticed she referred to Emmy Freeman as her law student, volunteer. So to answer your question, that's when I basically you do research, both visual or on books, and so these two popped out to me, and I really love it when you can combine both an interview with a scene. You see, yes. So then that allows you to tell both that specific story of being on the panel, but then you notice that Kathleen Paradas pops up in the hearing at her confirmation hearing, and it just and of course Emmy Freeman was very fresh because I don't think had not been interviewed at all about Justice Ginsburg, and her experience of actually being her volunteer researcher and actually being at the Supreme Court, sitting next to her, while she was arguing the cases or the Weisenfeld case, as she pointed out, she pointed out a character of quality that ordinarily a student wouldn't be asked to be next to, come to Washington, D.C. and to be at the council table, Yeah. And as Emmy Freeman said, it just reflected who she was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then she gave insights about being there as a 20-year-old student and seeing the justices react and the good. I love what she said about Tiger Woods,
Yeah.
And she said she saw how Justice Ginsburg, was so rigorous in the way she wrote and researched and rewrote, whatever she was doing, there were details that just came out, and that's what you delight in when the interview is something that you hadn't imagined quite.
It was very tremendous to hear her speak.
And then, okay, I have to talk, since you asked one other, the VMI case, the Virginia Military Institute case.
Yes.
Is really important. And to answer your question, how do you select who to film? Of course, the two authors of the notorious RBG book, the New York Times bestselling, I said, have to, if I'm lucky to get them in the film, they would be wonderful. So that was important. And then of course, Shauna particularly could talk about the, notorious RBG phenomenon, because it happened out of that 213 voting rights case. So by casting certain people, you are not only, if you're lucky, get that kind of interview, but it allows you to, go into a scene or an idea. In this case, the importance of that Voting Rights Act case. And but anyway, actually, out of the interview with Erin, she mentioned to me about this VMI graduate who ended up in the film. She mentioned Jennifer Carol Foy, and I don't know, I guess, fortunately, I was listening, and somehow I said, who would best tell that story? And so you get your ideas for casting or for interview from all sources.
Wow.
Because when you're in the mode, so to speak, you kind of, your antenna is out, and now that I look at myself, if you're in it, you're just doing it, and then you look back and say, oh, I was listening, and that Virginia Military Institute graduate popped out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I love her story, as you know, she's amazing. And as you may know now, she is not only, she ran during, in 217, not unlike AOC. She was of that generation, said, no, I think we need to go down the direction rather than with President Trump. Okay, that inspired her to run for office against an established Democrat, and she won.
Yeah.
And and the amazing thing is, anyway, when I started to interview her, I probably didn't know she was a delegate. Anyway, I didn't know that she was both a public defender and a delegate of the Virginia State Legislature and the mother of twin boys.
Oh, wow.
Why not?
Just fine as you go along.
Why not? And as you may know now, out of that opportunity that she acknowledges comes from Justice Ginsburg's ruling on the VMI case. She said that she had the chance to go to a top military school and learn skills that now allow her to feel she's running for the governor of Virginia for 2021. So
that's amazing.
So those are great stories that come out of, what Justice Ginsburg does here, and you can just see the ripple effect down the line.
Yes. Yeah. Were you able, were you close to finishing the film before Justice Ginsburg passed? Were you able to show it to her? Were any of her members of her family before she passed on?
Yeah. Well, actually, the first screening was at the AFI DC documentary festival, and partly because, and it was a sneak preview. It was one that we were probably tweaking a little more, but it was in mid 2019. It was finished enough to screen it, and she was invited by the president of AFI. The justice was invited to the sneak preview screening. It was on the weekend, on Saturday before the end of the term, and she was very busy. She had many things. She really had work to do, so she did not see it. She was invited. I wrote her, said anytime you need to see the film, please let us know. So she did not go to that screening. Some of her best friends came to the screening from the National Women's Law Center, and they loved it. Her family has since seen it. That is Professor Jane Ginsburg, her daughter, who teaches at Columbia, had heard about the film and asked if she could see a copy. I sent her a pre-release copy. So I think the family knows about that. This film. They know all about the rollout, so to speak.
Yeah, that's great. And with the release of Ruth, you spent 4 years making it from 2017 up until the release just recently. And the release of Ruth coincides with another woman, just like Justice Ginsburg, breaking the glass ceiling, and that's Kamala Harris. How did it feel to see a woman sworn in as vice president?
Well, it seemed natural to me. Of course, there would be a
Yeah.
woman sworn in. There was and especially one as qualified and as accomplished as Vice President Kamala Harris,
Mhm.
whom I had actually filmed in California
Okay.
when he was Attorney General. I was doing a film in. I live in Los Angeles County.
Mhm.
I was doing a film which I'd love you to show, but it was
Yeah.
it was done 6 years ago. It's called G-Dog. And
Okay.
G-Dog is a name affectionately given to a Jesuit priest by the homies. That is, kids who've been on the streets and been in youth authority camps and been in gangs. But it's a place called Homeboy Industries that was created by Father Gregory Boyle, in which kids are given a second chance.
Mhm.
And so they're trying to break the pipeline, what do you call it, the pipeline to break the pipeline from youth authorities to prison
Yeah.
that's plagued us. So anybody who's anybody comes to Homeboy Industries in downtown. If you're anywhere involved in law enforcement, the police chief of LA, has lunch at the fantastic restaurant, which is a place where the ex-homies work. It's a
Mhm.
place that teaches that's really offering kids a chance to work and to develop all kinds of life skills. Get their GED. Learn how to be ready for an interview. You name it. And so Kamala Harris, that is Attorney General Kamala Harris, came in, and you could just tell she has this charisma and this curiosity and all the qualities you want in a person who's a leader, certainly the vice president's position. So yeah, it was very natural for me to see her up there. How's that?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's about time, right?
Definitely. Yeah.
India and England and
Oh, yeah.
other countries can have women, leaders and presidents. So
Yeah. Definitely way long overdue.
yes.
And final question, what do you hope that the audience that sees your film will take away from watching Ruth?
Thank you for the question. I feel that as a person, a citizen, has learned so much from doing this film, I hope that all of us will be attentive to our political process and really be involved as citizens and vote, and to understand that you make a difference and that the Supreme Court has a profound impact on your lives if you think about it, because they are dealing with fundamental questions that affect our daily lives, such as pay equity. In the case of Lilly Ledbetter's story,
Mhm.
women and men are not paid equally historically and now. Do they deal with questions that affect healthcare, marriage, whether you can serve in the military? We saw it just recently in the LGBTQ issue. So I hope that anyone, young, especially high school and junior high school students looking at this, will say, that they will see to be good citizens, really, and to pay attention, because every vote counts, and who we elect has a profound impact on what our lives will go, this direction or that direction.
And that's a great note to end on. Freida, thank you so much for participating in this Q&A. It was a pleasure talking to you. And congratulations on the success of Ruth Justice Ginsburg. In her own words, it's a tremendous film. And everybody out there, if you haven't seen it yet, please check it out in our virtual theater. It's definitely a must watch.
Thank you so much, Brendan. And thank you, Renew Theaters. It's been wonderful to meet you virtually.
She's experienced enormous sadness in her life. She's lived through backlashes to her life's work. We're in the middle of a backlash right now.
I strongly dissent from today's opinion.
What is going on that she has become this cult figure now? she just like is who she is. She's very confident, very aware of herself.
Recognizing that this is probably the last time that the American people will ever have a chance to glimpse you as a person and what you would like them to think most of all when they think of you.